I remember the first time I heard Margaret Lenz's name, almost by accident, late at night, while leafing through a half-forgotten biography at a second-hand bookstore. Rain drifted in sheets against the windows, and the lamplight in that cramped corner barely touched the dust crawling over the pages. Her story gripped me instantly. This Austrian socialite, torn from her privilege and comfort, suddenly cast out into a world where all the gold, all the fancy names, meant nothing. She slipped between worlds, slipping secrets instead of jewelry, spinning her wit and raw intelligence into the only currency she could count on. Margaret, alone and borderless, taught herself to survive by trusting what she knew, not by clinging to what she'd lost. The echo of that story hasn't left me since. Sometimes I wonder if Margaret felt the same squeeze of desperation I once did. The sharp sting of waking up and realizing everything you thought was stable can be taken or devalued in an instant. I know I have. There was a peculiar morning not so long ago when my own security unraveled. My boss called me into an office with cold lighting and polite apologies, and suddenly the neat handwriting of salary figures in my notebook became irrelevant. I walked home weighted with that hollow, buzzing fear. What am I really left with, now that the scaffolding I depended on is gone? In the days that followed, I felt invisible, like I existed in the space between worth and usefulness, not quite belonging anywhere, much as Margaret must have felt, watching the familiar world recede like a shoreline behind a storm. But here's the thing that gnawed at me most, and maybe it's gnawing at you too. Not just the loss, but the realization that I still had something of value, something that no layoff, no closed door could strip away. I carried skills, observations, odd bits of knowledge, instincts hard-won from years of living and struggling and dreaming. These didn't show up as deposits in my bank account. They didn't have a neat category on any resume template. Yet every now and then, a friend would ask for advice, or a random connection would comment on how I solved a tricky problem, and I'd feel a flicker of possibility. Could all this, these unpolished gems of my experience, be worth more than I ever dared believe? Could they even change my future? If only I learned how to see them, shape them, wield them like the currency they really were? Sometimes, in quiet moments, I'd see Margaret again in my mind, her poised in a foreign ballroom, surrounded by uniforms and suspicion, trading a sliver of insight to buy herself one more day of freedom. She didn't have a flag. She didn't have a savings account packed with inherited wealth. But she had herself. She had her mind. And as unlikely as it sounds, that proved to be enough. So why? I ask myself, do so many of us feel stuck because we don't see ourselves as wealthy from the inside out? Why do we let invisible riches lie dormant? Hopes, talents, networks, unconventional knowledge, while we chase after someone else's approval or security. The real problem, or maybe it's an unwelcome gift, is that no one ever taught us how to turn what we know into something tangible and rewarding. We're led to believe that unless there's a certificate stamped with authority or a job title that sounds impressive at dinner parties, what we know doesn't count. We let habit and self-doubt keep us small, sometimes because it's safer that way, or because the world quietly tells us that our kind of wisdom doesn't fit easily into the algebra of success. But what if that's the lie that's kept us hungry in a pantry full of overlooked ingredients? What if, like Margaret, we are so much more resourceful, adaptable, and rich than we've allowed ourselves to imagine? If only someone pulled aside the curtain, showed us how to see and use what's always been there. I believe our untapped abilities could not only fund the next chapter, but transform our very identity. If you've ever looked at your own hands and wondered where your leverage really is, I want you to stay with me for this journey. Together, we're going to dig under the surface and rediscover the hidden fortune lying dormant inside us, and, step by step, learn how to turn it into a living, breathing source of abundance. As I wandered through bitter Vienna nights, pressed between anonymity and the remnants of once familiar luxury, I felt the world watching me through cold glass. Each alleyway whispered the silent rules of survival. Rules Alice, a spirited artist exiled from her homeland, had once explained beside a flickering candle flame. She taught me that family stories were never just scraps of nostalgia, but living roots, tangled deeply within our sense of self, especially when the map shifted beneath our feet. Her words followed me, echoing louder when circumstances stripped away all pretense. When money vanished and comfort shrank to the sound of my own footsteps, I found an unexpected companion in memory. The lessons, warnings, and half-joking proverbs that had shaped my earliest impressions of wealth. My mother's voice, always weary but insistent, repeated phrases she'd absorbed from generations back. Better poor and honest than rich and cold. My uncle waved his hands in outrage every time taxes came up, feeding me cautionary tales of families torn apart by inheritance or ambition. During hushed conversations at family tables, money twisted itself around fear, pride, or even resentment, becoming a shadow figure at every meal. These scripts, spoken and unspoken, carved out boundaries in my mind more binding than any law. Yet, beliefs rooted this way rarely surface until conflict rips them from the soil. One evening, as I pressed my palms against a frostbitten park gate, I felt shame blossoming inside. Shame for desiring security, for thinking wealth could be a force for kindness or beauty. I realized then that my sense of possibility had not been defined by opportunity itself, but by inherited opinions, relics masquerading as truths. Childhood memories, those glittering with scarcity or discomfort, wrote silent commands beneath daily decisions, steering me almost unconsciously towards self-doubt or unearned guilt whenever fortune knocked at my door. An experience at a crowded Vienna cafe made the invisible programming vivid. Across from me sat Emil, an engineer who wore threadbare suits but spoke with the certainty of a banker. He believed his worth grew every time he saved a penny. Nothing wrong with prudence. Yet he scoffed at risk, opportunity, or any detour from the narrow lane of his parents' world. His reluctance was not mere caution. It was a generational echo, a reverberation of fears and scripts from dusty towns and lifetimes before. Conversing with him, I saw my own hesitations reflected, multiplied, a hall of mirrors stretching back to the places and people I once called home. Moving beyond Emil's conviction, I began observing the effortless certainty with which the wealthy, often at odds with my folks' careful skepticism, claimed the world as their own. In their houses, money was discussed openly, without dread. No voices laced ambition with judgment. Instead, they swapped strategies and encouraged each other to learn, almost as if abundance were an art passed down through conversation. Their ease did not spring from luck, but from expectations woven into the fabric of their upbringing. Reflecting on these stark contrasts, I recognized the indelible influence of origin stories on our financial narrative. Every hesitation, inclination to hoard or give away, every surge of optimism or cynicism could be traced back to teachings never chosen. These frameworks, shaped by the collective memory of those who taught us how to count coins or chase dreams, operate like invisible engineers behind our thoughts. Armed with this insight, I started to unthread each lingering maxim, holding it against the light of my own aspirations. I asked myself, whose voice really determined the outer limit of my ambition? Was I living out of loyalty to an outdated script, or moving forward by conscious design? The answer, sometimes painful, sometimes liberating, laid the foundation for transformation, the first bold step toward reframing not only my future, but the legacy I would leave behind. The evening Margaret decided her only way forward was through the lion's den, I understood something new about necessity and resourcefulness. She wasn't reckless, but methodical, a chess player moving with calculated grace. She slipped into a worn gray coat, dyed her hair, just so, and adopted the clipped accent of someone twice her status. Those nights, as we hunched over a single candle, plotting escape routes and weighing risks versus rewards, it became clear, limitations ignite invention. Standing on the edge of that unsteady chapter, a quiet revelation struck me. While some trust in gold, marble halls, or influential names, Margaret wielded a sharper tool, her awareness that most obstacles are made of thoughts, not of iron. There was a moment, as we lingered near a smoky tavern in Linz, that this truth crystallized. Inside, a colonel played a dangerous game of boasting, codes, troop movements, careless bravado in a cloud of cigars. Margaret gazed at her wrist, feigning boredom, yet she absorbed every machination. Later, she scribbled essential facts onto the margin of a faded flyer. "Listen," she whispered, We are only as trapped as we believe we are. This belief itself, fluid, persistent, sometimes invisible, acts like a lens that distorts opportunity or brings it into sharp relief. Turning inward, I realized I carried my own collection of dusty assumptions. These were the hand-me-down convictions. If you're not born to privilege, you'll stay in the shadows. Or, only brilliant icons succeed. But sitting with Margaret, I watched another truth play out in real time. Her self-talk didn't follow inherited scripts. Instead, she replaced old shackles with fierce mantras. "Knowledge feeds me," she murmured. "Cleverness is my inheritance." In her mouth, words became keys. Now, let's consider how these internal narratives unfold in our daily lives. I remember a gardener, Emile, whose hands were coarse and caked with earth. He once confessed, "I always thought riches belonged to others, people with connections, a certain last name." Yet, gradually, Emile changed his story. He began studying plant grafting after dusk, trading tricks with market stall owners, then daring to apply what he learned. When his neighbors marveled at his fruit harvests, Emile started selling saplings, then teaching afternoons classes. He upgraded his beliefs daily. What if I'm not just a gardener, but a cultivator of value? The transformation started quietly, yet widened his prospects immeasurably. Furthermore, our surroundings, social circles, media, even fleeting conversations, offer us beliefs to borrow. Some lift, others anchor. I often watched as acquaintances chose subtle self-sabotage, muttering fears about failure, convincing themselves that new avenues were too risky. But now and then, someone broke the pattern. I noticed how these outliers looked for reasons it could work, not why it couldn't. Instead of echoing limitations, they built new truths from their actions. Building on this, I began collecting bridge thoughts, small, empowering beliefs as stepping stones. Even when uncertainty clouded everything, ideas like, "If someone else found a way, maybe I can too," became firm ground underfoot. Through Margaret's experience and my own faltering steps, I learned to question the voice that said, "Not for you." I noticed its tone, traced its origin, and then deliberately countered it. Sometimes that meant reaching out for completely new perspectives, listening to stories of unconventional success, absorbing that borrowed confidence until it felt innate. By shifting my beliefs on a granular level, I noticed other changes. Risks showed up as invitations, not threats. Setbacks turned into guideposts. Margaret's muttered affirmations became my own. "Resourcefulness will open doors. Adaptability is my advantage." As these beliefs took root, my decisions followed suit, and I saw doors swing wider than I once thought possible. Through every step, I discovered that the strongest currency, stronger even than knowledge alone, was the story I chose to tell myself about what was possible. That narrative, subtle but potent, proved the first and most vital secret to unlocking my own potential. A cold wind rattled the panes as I leaned over stacks of half-burned letters, each one a silent witness to choices that could not be undone. Across the room, Mira, my companion in both fear and ambition, thumbed a tattered book of codes we'd recovered from a weathered diplomat. "It's always the same," she whispered. "Knowledge is only as powerful as what you dare to do with it." Her words lingered, thick with truth. No one issued us blueprints for survival or handed us a list of instructions. We stitched together possibility using scraps of intuition, flashes of courage, and stubborn persistence. Despite the cacophony in our minds, Mira and I understood sitting still meant surrender. We experimented, testing subtle signals at train stations or slipping unmarked envelopes to errand boys with unassuming faces. Confidence grew not because success rushed to meet us, but because every attempt, successful or disastrous, taught us something crucial about timing, trust, and self-reliance. Slowly, our days began to resemble a string of auditions, each new gambit an exercise in calculated risk, each small payoff carving a path forward. I kept lists in the margins of newspapers, jotting down not only strategies that worked, but habits that made me more attuned to hidden opportunity. Yet, in moments of exhaustion, fatigue threatened to smother resolve. Sleep evaded us, especially after close calls that left adrenaline thrumming for hours. During wakeful stretches, I watched passers-by in the dull glow of early dawn. Grocers, couriers, night watchmen, wondering how many lived in quiet retreat, waiting for safety or certainty before acting. It struck me. Remaining paralyzed by fear was its own form of surrender, locking us away in invisible prisons. The only antidote was doing, no matter how minuscule the step. So, at dusk, we wrote grateful notes for each resource. A sympathetic conductor, a slice of warmed bread, a friendly dog guarding a back alley, and reviewed these before sleep, choosing to amplify what sustained us over what could break us. Some evenings, Mira would sit at the narrow kitchen table, drawing future maps with a stub of charcoal, plotting not just our escape, but a vision of possibility that reached well beyond our predicament. We'd linger on these sketches, letting hope creep back in. I realized, with a jolt, that visualizing success planted seeds for tomorrow's boldness. These weren't daydreams, but active rehearsals. A rehearsal of a life outside the shadows. A preview that taught my hands and heart to welcome prosperity without flinching. Jotting down aspirations, we discovered, wasn't wishful thinking. It was an architect's tool, sharpening focus and making our target unmistakable in the fog of daily uncertainty. As weeks tumbled forward, old habits began to unravel. No longer did I flinch at unannounced knocks or second-guess every decision. Instead, a rhythm emerged, one built on practical routines, setting aside 3 quiet minutes in the morning to record victories, practicing gratitude even for tiny victories, and replaying the sensations of old successes with vivid detail. Adopting these simple rituals rewired my attention away from lurking threats and toward possibility. Every task, no matter how mundane, cataloging a stranger's accent, memorizing a train's schedule, became an investment. Eventually, these efforts compounded, and the elusive connection between mindset and tangible result grew obvious. What we rehearsed internally, we orchestrated externally. Over time, it became clear that action and intention are inseparable allies. There was no magical boundary between internal shifts and changes in fortune. Each small motion fortified resolve. Each act of courage multiplied available options. Even as doubt flickered on hard days, we pushed back, choosing to document proof that our efforts bore fruit. If ever a shadow threatened to reassert itself, Mira would write her signature large and bold at the bottom of our shared log, a testament to the fact that every day offered another chance to convert resilience and hope into something radiant and lasting. As dawn pressed gently against grimy window panes, I found myself in a cramped attic room, heart hammering from the pounding on the street below. My hands shook, residue from long, sleepless nights, but the fear didn't shackle me anymore. Over time, necessity had taught me something strangely exhilarating. Our identity with money could transform just as fiercely as our circumstances. I remember the day Astrid, a seamstress who'd once tailored skirts for Viennese aristocrats, burst in clutching a wrinkled ledger and a half-finished silk scarf. "If I wait for someone to rescue me, I'll wither on these floorboards," she said, her voice colored with both bitterness and defiance. She proceeded to map out, in rapid-fire syllables, an audacious plan for survival, not as a servant or a silent observer, but as an entrepreneur. In her eyes, I witnessed a kind of conscious self-reclamation, a pivot from battered refugee to shrewd negotiator, ready to forge alliances and barter insight for sanctuary. Thus began my own deep reckoning with a concept I'd only recently understood. In times of upheaval, we're presented with an unexpected invitation to choose who we want to become. Our very sense of self knitted together not from trinkets of status, but from adaptability and courage to grow. Margaret's shadow loomed large in this process. Whereas she once moved in rooms gilded with civility and ceremony, she was now skilled at navigating layered conversations with people of every stripe. Because, at her core, she declared herself not a victim of exile, but a guardian of her own fate. That bold self-definition seeped into every interaction. She greeted possibility with a raised chin, a quick quip, and unwavering eye contact, traits that charmed guards every bit as much as they unsettled informants. Shifting from reliance on external validation to cultivating robust internal standards proved to be an elusive but vital pursuit. Gone were the days of measuring self-worth by others' expectations or approval. Each of us in our little crew started tracking our own markers of progress, Trust earned, skills showcased, tiny victories tallied without fanfare. I realized that the more I let go of stories handed down about what someone like me should do, the more energy I had to imagine entirely new outcomes. One evening, crouched over a pot of bitter coffee, I consciously made a choice. I would stake my claim in this world not as someone scraping by on luck, but as a person whose talents could anchor and elevate others. With every little risk taken, vouching for a friend, betting on an untested plan, I saw my inner narrative sharpen from spectator to instigator. None of this happened without resistance. Old loyalties tugged, threatening to pull me back into complacency. Yet the more I listened to individuals who had defined their own moral codes, who navigated treacherous ground without losing integrity, the more inspired I became to weave prosperity into a tapestry of purpose. Across makeshift tables, I watched quiet revolutions as people set prices for their wisdom, negotiated fair trades, or chose transparency over temporary gain. Wealth, I learned, could be aligned with responsibility and empathy without compromise. With every identity forged anew, the atmosphere around us shifted palpably. Strength came from understanding that resilience wasn't just a trait, but a choice, a muscle flexed intentionally every time a person refused to shrink from adversity. The more this mindset took hold, the clearer it became that prosperity wasn't a prize at the journey's end. It was a way of moving, deciding, and relating. It infused our plans and laughter alike with a subtle, unyielding confidence. Even as adversity roared at the door, I witnessed firsthand how abundance followed those who walked with both conviction and discernment, those who saw their identities as evolving, capable of making space for both ambition and ethics. In those flickering hours of risk and resolve, I became intimately acquainted with a richer definition of wealth, something seated within, rooted in adaptability, and grown continually through the choices we dared to make. Morning sunlight pooled across a battered desk as I thumbed through a stack of unfamiliar ledgers, their pages crisp with the promise of new beginnings. Outside, city sounds bustled, vendors setting up stalls, streetcars screeching. Meanwhile, within those quiet walls, a subtle shift had been taking root. Instead of chasing external achievements or allowing old patterns to dictate my next move, I began to notice a stirring inward drive, a sense that my actions, no matter how small, could lay the groundwork for something sturdier than any fleeting windfall. One afternoon, while sorting receipts in cramped quarters, I met Joseph, a keen-eyed bookmaker known for his quick wit and sharper instincts. He leaned forward across a crooked table, his expression earnest. "If you wish to change your prospects," he whispered, "start by mastering your rhythms. Discipline isn't glamorous, but it's a sunrise that never fails." His advice echoed long after he'd gone, urging me to explore how habits and routines might turn ambition into tangible progress. Later that week, I ventured into unexplored territory, literally and metaphorically. I set aside 15 minutes each day to understand new markets, scribbling notes on trends that once seemed foreign. Rather than feeling adrift, I sensed an emerging clarity. A ritual formed, brewing strong coffee, sitting down with intention, and focusing entirely on one task at a time. Oddly, this simple act lent momentum to ideas that had previously felt scattered. By tracking patterns and logging outcomes, I started to see clear cause and effect. No luck required, only consistency. Branching out, I sought inspiration in places where creativity met practicality. At a local print shop, I observed Lucia, a craftswoman who charmed customers with custom engravings. Watching her process, I noticed she combined technical prowess with daily improvisation, refining her approach with each new commission. Later, we spoke about her method. She confessed, "My secret isn't talent alone. I work out what people truly value, adapt my style, and deliver on time, without fail." Her system, flexible yet unwavering, revealed that adaptability paired with reliable effort creates its own kind of luck. Occasionally I stumbled, delaying steps or falling prey to distraction. During quieter evenings, I would sit on the back steps, listening to distant laughter, and reflect on what had sidetracked me. Gradually, I recognized these lapses as guideposts, not verdicts. Adjusting my approach, I implemented short bursts of focused activity followed by deliberate downtime. expanding my toolkit with strategies plucked directly from lived experience rather than inherited routine. Each experiment, some successful, others faltering, shed light on new dimensions of self-discipline, teaching me to reset without self-judgment. Within this landscape, a sense of agency blossomed. Where once I felt buffeted by circumstance, now firm footing emerged beneath calculated choices. Setting deliberate boundaries around my time allowed for steady creative output. Even setbacks became sources of information, refining my blueprint instead of tearing it apart. Confidence in my own process grew stronger with deliberate repetition. When doubt crept in, it was greeted with a schedule and a plan, not panic. People around me started to notice a new steadiness. They remarked on my increased focus, my ability to deliver on promises large and small. With each fulfilled commitment, trust flourished, both internally and with those who depended on me. I had always believed change arrived with a grand gesture, but it quietly revealed itself, woven through persistent effort, day after day, reshaping not just my circumstances, but my sense of possibility. Reflecting on this journey so far, I sense we're standing at the threshold of something rare, a pause in the long corridor where past and possibility converge, the echo of our old patterns softening as new threads begin to weave themselves through the air. Night, outside my window, hums with a promise, cool and alert, as if the city itself is holding its breath and waiting to see whether I'll rise differently this time. I can almost hear the whispered negotiations of wind around the attic eaves. Behind them, my own thoughts rearrange, as if unseen hands are rating my story, piece by piece, strand by strand. There's an invisible architecture forming beneath what once felt like chaos, a gradual interlacing where resilience, action, and fresh intention cement together, quietly altering my reflection. In this twilight lull, subtlety rules. Change reveals itself shyly, like a blush blooming up through the dark earth after a long winter. Sometimes I catch myself tracing, with fingertip, the outline of a map I carry only inside. The way forward isn't always clear, but I feel a growing coherence, something akin to a melody emerging from discord, a harmony only discovered after hours of gentle tuning. I realize now, the composition was never absent, merely waiting for me to hear it. This transformation seldom announces itself in fanfare or spectacle. It's more akin to the natural process by which a river, unnoticed, carves canyons. Gentle pressure, persistent flow, a quiet reshaping of solid ground. My own identity, once rooted in what was handed down or prescribed, begins to shift, less like a mask switched at will, more like a landscape with contours changing under dawn's slow illumination. Within that subtle illumination, I start noticing resources formerly overlooked, a network of small bridges, a new confidence in the timbre of my own voice, a sense of momentum, steady and unforced. Sitting in the half-light, there are moments when clarity glimmers and flashes, a sensation akin to stepping into an entirely new room inside the house I've always lived in. Light falls differently on the familiar walls. Objects once hidden in the corners draw the eye. These glimpses nudge me forward, guiding softly, quietly, in a direction I had not thought to travel. Each new gesture, each decision rooted in insight rather than habit, seems to set off a chain reaction. Opportunities one might have overlooked now glimmer at the periphery, inviting further exploration. Curiously, these shifts become self-reinforcing. Each risk, small or significant, echoes back courage, as if the universe is suddenly a chamber attuned to encouragement rather than rebuke. My steps grow surer on the worn floorboards. Even uncertainty holds less threat, for mystery is no longer synonymous with danger, but with invitation. The boundaries around what I once believed possible stretch, becoming translucent, almost permeable. Inside, I sense a subtle recalibration, as if my internal compass, reset through newfound awareness and repeated practice, now points not toward old disappointments, but toward a steadily brightening horizon. Even interactions with others evolve. Where before I entered conversations seeking approval or validation, now there's room for curiosity, a willingness to listen for the wisdom in exchange, confidence that I, too, contribute something essential and rare. My words no longer grasp at the surface, but reach deeper. Questions framed by real intent, answers offered with openness rather than guardedness. There's a sensation now, fleeting yet vivid, of standing beneath a sky just before dawn, watching faint stars dissolve into morning. In that wide quiet, I sensed the contours of change, the hush before a symphony's first swell. I find myself inhaling with anticipation, lungs open to the possibilities that gather at the edge of light. And as we reach this cusp together, I sense the final movement building, a deep current stirring below the surface, drawing us toward an unfolding future crafted with clarity, courage, and the secret strengths we've only begun to understand. As I sit by the window, city lights flickering in the distance and a gentle warmth settling across my shoulders, something stirs inside me, a feeling I haven't known before. For so long, I chased certainty in figures and facts, hunting for assurance in the things others deemed secure. But tonight, quiet and resolved, I understand that all my searching was never about money or status at all. What I truly sought was the pulse of possibility, an invitation to step fully into my own story, to realize that everything I once believed missing was already whispering within me, waiting to be found. Margaret's memory drifts back as a silent companion, no longer a distant legend but an echo woven into daily choices. I remember her laughter skimming over tension in crowded rooms, the glint in her eye when plans seemed impossible. She showed me neither gold nor cunning meant anything without heart. That true leverage lay in the willingness to meet life on its own unpredictable terms, improvising as dusk crumbled into dawn. In her presence, I learned that adaptability wasn't about bending to circumstance. It was about drawing strength from every loss, transforming doubt into resolve, and finding elegance in uncertainty. Scarcity once felt like a chain, the sense of belonging always tied to what I could prove or possess. Yet night after night, while the world weathered storms outside, I discovered that knowledge, the subtle lessons born of hardship and hope, became the only treasure that multiplied in the sharing. Experiences long buried beneath regret emerged as guides, teaching me to recognize value where others saw none. I grew willing to scramble, to reach, to ask again and again. What if every setback held a secret route forward, every limitation an unopened door? Our lives, I see now, are less about rescuing what's broken and more about creating, stitch by stitch, a tapestry from both light and shadow. I learned to trade certainty for curiosity and to trust in the silent expertise honed behind closed doors. Conversations once spent in longing grew rich with possibility. Connections deepened, alliances grew, and my own role expanded. It became less essential whether I fit an expected mold and more vital how honestly I moved, how bravely I staked my place among the hidden and hopeful. Tonight, as wind unsettles the curtains and quiet expectation settles in, I recognize new freedom. I am no longer content to let fear script my days. Possibility is not a vision to be awaited, but a pulse to answer, a question to lean into. With each choice, bold or humble, I am both mapping new territory and honoring the path behind me. I carry Margaret's resourcefulness and my own, blending them into a compass truer than any chart. What's been learned cannot be unlearned. What's been seen now shapes what's next. As I rise from my chair, a gentle certainty remains. What we know, the wisdom earned in the folds of hardship and resilience, will always have value, especially when others overlook it. Our stories, crafted by trying and risking, contain endless chapters yet unwritten. Maybe this, in the hush before the world stirs again, is abundance itself, recognizing that even when coins are few, our ingenuity, our willingness to act, and our openness to be changed are riches no one can steal. I step forward, willing, finally, to answer the possibilities calling my name.